People in extreme conditions can be pushed into carrying out extreme acts. History often paints a vivid picture of oppression, but amidst the dark chapters of slavery, there were moments of stark defiance. From the smoke-filled battlefields of the Haitian Revolution to the secretive gatherings of the Maroon Wars, slaves not only fought back, but sometimes turned the very tools of their subjugation against their oppressors. In the United States, figures like Gabriel and Nat Turner became symbols of resistance, leading revolts that shook the foundations of the slaveholding South. Thousands who participated in the enslavement of others eventually found the tables turned. Most slave rebellions were unsuccessful in their aims, and many planned uprisings never managed even to materialize. In Richmond, Virginia in 1800, an enslaved blacksmith named Gabriel and his followers conspired to rise. Over half of the population of Richmond were enslaved blacks, and the themes of freedom and liberty espoused by the recent American Revolution had many slaves hungry for change. The conspiracy was statewide, with the plans being shared with enslaved men in 10 different counties. Gabriel put his blacksmithing tools to work, converting scythes and other farm tools into swords and spears and casting musket balls. The slaves planned to march into Richmond, where they would take control of the Virginia State Armory, capture the state capitol, and hold the governor hostage to negotiate their freedom. On the day of the planned insurrection, August 30th, the city of Richmond was hit with heavy storms and streets flooded. 2 slaves, aware of the planned attack, informed their masters, and the state militia was deployed before the uprising could take place. Gabriel attempted to flee but was betrayed by a fellow slave named Will Billy King. Altogether, 70 men were arrested for their involvement in the plot. Of the 70 arrested, Gabriel, his 2 brothers, and 23 more were executed, while the 2 who informed on the conspirators were granted their freedom. The failed uprising resulted in a wave of fear in Virginia, and harsh laws were brought in preventing slaves from congregating after work. Masters could no longer rent their slaves out, and newly freed slaves could not remain in Virginia. The most violent slave insurrection in United States history was the Nat Turner Rebellion. Nat Turner had been born into slavery in Virginia only 6 days before the execution of Gabriel Prosser. Turner could read and write from a young age and was known for his high intelligence and religiosity. He received what he believed to be visions and messages from God, and believed himself to be a prophet. He preached to his fellow slaves and over 10 years gathered a considerable following to whom he preached about the coming day of judgment. A solar eclipse in February of 1831 was the sign for the rebellion to begin, interpreted by Turner as the hand of a black man covering the sun. But Turner's illness meant the attack was delayed until August 13th, when another atmospheric phenomenon was again seen as a sign from God. The uprising began a week later. The slaves were armed with clubs, machetes, and axes, and some were on horseback. The first victims were the masters of Turner's plantation and his family. The gang then wandered house to house, freeing slaves and killing all whites, regardless of their age or sex. The only people to be spared were a small number of impoverished whites who Turner believed thought no better of themselves than they did of Negroes. The rebellion finally ended after 4 days at the Belmont plantation, where the rebels were met by a large number of state militia soldiers and dozens of artillery pieces. Turner managed to evade capture and spent 6 weeks hiding in the woodlands of Southampton County, unwilling to travel too far from his wife, who was brutally tortured by her masters after the rebellion. He was eventually discovered by a local farmer and taken to prison. Of those captured, 30 slaves were convicted, 18 being executed, and 12 being forcefully sold outside of the state of Virginia. The slaveholding states of America were always afraid of slave rebellions, especially following the Haitian Revolution, and so authorities felt they needed to make an example of Turner. Turner was hung and then beheaded. His organs were dissected and his body was skinned, with the skin being used to make grotesque mementos, such as purses. Haitian Revolution. Perhaps the most bloody slave uprising was the Haitian Revolution. After almost 100 years of enslavement and mistreatment by the ruling French regime, the black slaves of Haiti rose, beginning an incredibly brutal civil war. The uprising began in 1791 with a secret voodoo ceremony, attended by thousands of slaves who, afterward, began to kill their masters. Black slaves outnumbered the French settlers and soldiers 8-1, and within 10 days, they had total control over northern Haiti. The Civil War continued until 1804, with the eventual abolition of slavery and founding of Haiti as an independent nation, making it the only slave rebellion to result in the establishment of a new, independent country. The revolution was incredibly bloody, as slaves sought revenge against their masters. Within weeks, 4,000 white settlers had been killed. Everyone was mutilated and brutalized, whether men, women, or children. In the early part of the uprising, the heads of French children were placed on pikes and carried in front of the rebel slave columns as a sort of banner. After 13 years of fighting, the former slaves had total control of Haiti, and their commander, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, was crowned Emperor of Haiti, ordered the massacre of all remaining whites, declaring, "Break the eggs, take out the yolk, and eat the white." The order was given on the 22nd of February, 1804, and ordered that knives, swords, and clubs should be used to not make too much noise. Dessalines visited every city in Haiti, ensuring his orders were carried out. On arrival, he would talk to the former slaves, reminding them of the atrocities committed by the whites, to put them into a blind fury. Everyone was ordered to participate, including the mixed-race former slaves, so they could prove their loyalty. Captured whites were brutalized in the most horrific of ways. Even the poor white workers with absolutely no involvement in slavery. Groups were rounded up by roving bands of soldiers, armed mainly with machetes, once used for harvesting their masters' crops, but now used for execution. Men, women, and children were often stripped naked before being slashed, stabbed, having their limbs severed, or being decapitated. The rebels aimed to exterminate every non-slave, including many of the free blacks whom they believed to have been pawns of the French, and who often had disdain for the uneducated black slaves. Women, however, were sometimes offered an escape from death. As men roamed the cities of Haiti searching for victims, white French women who took their fancy were sometimes offered a chance at survival by marrying their would-be killer. Most of these women would be eventually killed anyhow, as Dessalines' advisors reminded him that as long as French women existed in the country, they could create more French men. Within less than 2 months, the white population of Haiti was almost eradicated. 5,000 had been killed, while a small number were spared or managed to escape the country. Dessalines declared, "I will go to my grave happy. We have avenged our brothers. Haiti has become a blood-red spot on the face of the globe." Maroon Wars. In most cases, escaped slaves were soon captured, but those who did manage to escape sometimes formed bandit groups, hiding in the wilderness and surviving by raiding nearby plantations and travelers. These groups, referred to as Maroons, were especially active in the Caribbean. The Maroons were especially troublesome in Jamaica, where they were a constant thorn in the side of the British colonial authorities. The first all-out conflict began in 1728 and lasted for 11 years. Whites were heavily outnumbered by African slaves, and so a small part of the country was under effective control, allowing large Maroon communities to exist in relative safety, away from white authorities. There had been small-scale conflict with the Maroons since the beginning of British control, but this was mainly limited to small raids and banditry. The conflict escalated after British soldiers were sent to Jamaica to bring the Maroons under control. The Maroons fought with guerrilla tactics, which the British soldiers were not capable of effectively combating. 2 more army regiments were sent to Jamaica, and the British eventually managed to occupy the Maroon stronghold of Nannytown. But occupying the remote settlement was too expensive. British soldiers were recalled from Nannytown, and the Maroons, most of whom had been hiding in the wilderness, returned without a fight. After years of attacks, losing men both to Maroon attack and tropical disease, the British realized that continuing the fight was useless, nothing more than a waste of money and life, and so a peace treaty was signed. The treaty granted Maroons limited rights to their land, as long as they refused to harbor escaped slaves. The treaty caused a split between the Maroons and the enslaved, who now felt they had nowhere to escape. Over the next few decades, British planters encroached onto Maroon land, and discontent with the treaty resulted in the beginning of the Second Maroon War, an 8-month conflict in 1795. However, the disparate group of Maroons were no longer united. The Windward Maroons, who had received better terms from the British, remained neutral, while the Maroons of Accompong aided the British in their fight against the Trelawney Maroons. The conflict began with the arrest of 2 Maroons for theft who were whipped by black slaves. For over half a century, the Free Maroons had been helping the British capture and return runaway slaves. And the sight of black slaves abusing and laughing at Free Maroons was taken as a great insult. 6 Maroon leaders came to the British authorities to discuss the issue, but were arrested under the orders of the British governor, who feared the Maroons had too much of a revolutionary spirit. Local white planters begged the governor to deal with the situation without violence, which was seen as unnecessary for such a minor issue. But he instead sent a force of soldiers to Trelawney Town. British forces outnumbered the Trelawney Maroons 10-1, but they were not trained in the guerrilla warfare which the Maroons practiced and often fell victim to ambushes. 65 British soldiers were killed in the first 2 weeks of conflict, mainly in hit-and-run style ambush attacks, while not a single Maroon had been killed. The Maroons also began a campaign of destruction, burning down the crops and buildings of white settlers' plantations. The conflict had no clear victory for anyone. The British had been reduced to importing bloodhounds from Cuba to locate Maroon fighters, while the Maroons had difficulty obtaining ammunition, along with food and water as Jamaica entered its dry season. General Walpole sued for peace and gave the Maroons his word that they would not be deported or enslaved. As part of the treaty, the Maroons were ordered to present themselves to British authorities and beg for the king's forgiveness, return any runaway slaves in their possession, and relocate elsewhere in Jamaica. The Maroons were suspicious, and so did not present themselves until some months later. The governor took this as a breach of the treaty and had the Maroons deported to Nova Scotia. General Walpole, who had given the Maroons his word, resigned in protest. Not all slave revolts were violent. Non-violent civil disobedience was sometimes used to cause extreme inconvenience to slave masters and those who relied on their work. Various methods could be used, some more obvious than others. Many slaves feigned illness, worked slowly and to poor quality, or accidentally misplaced and damaged tools and equipment. These methods had the benefit of being hard to discover. Some more extreme measures could also be taken. The sabotaging of production, refusal to work, even theft and burning down the property of slave masters. This, however, was incredibly risky, and slaves risked torture or even execution if they were discovered. Suicide was also used in some cases, mainly by slaves fresh from Africa who refused to live in chains. The most famous case of which is referred to as the Igbo landings. In 1803, a slave ship landed in Georgia with a shipment of slaves brought straight from West Africa. 75 of these slaves were Igbo, an ethnic group known by plantation owners to be incredibly strong-headed and independent, and difficult to beat into submission. The 75 men were bought for $100 each, roughly $2,500 today, placed in chains, and loaded aboard a small ship destined for St. Simon's Island. During the journey to Igbo, men rose up and threw the ship's crew overboard, drowning them. The ship subsequently breached itself. They were aware that they could not escape, and rather than be enslaved or executed, they walked together into a deep creek, where most of them drowned. Wherever there have been slaves, there have been slave uprisings. From the servile wars of Rome to the mutinies of Ottoman galley slaves, as much as torture and brutality can subdue someone, it can also encourage them to rise up and take revenge. Very rarely are they successful, usually resulting in harsh reprisals and even stricter controls on enslaved populations. But for many, the simple act of having the courage to fight back in any way possible is some victory in itself.